it's almost time for Hamid Ali, whom some of you may know better by his pen name, A.H. Almas. Hamid and Karen are co-founders of the Diamond Approach. Hamid has written the foreword for Karen's book, The Jeweled Path, and now we will hear from Hamid. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. We're here tonight because of this book, The Jeweled Path. The author of this book will be talking to you about some things about the book. So one thing about this book is not separate from the author. And so I want to say a few things about each. Karen, the author, and myself been friends for about 40 years or so. Maybe more, 45, she says. I always mix my numbers. And I remember when we first were driving from Berkeley to Boulder to do some work together with a friend, Sandra Maitri at that time. It's a long way, so we were driving in her VW bug, and we were talking, and as usual, people talk about stories about their life, and she told me all of her life. Even the secrets she didn't tell anybody. And I was surprised. Why did she tell me all her secrets? Some of them were pretty intimate. I mean, I wasn't as daring as she was, but I did share some of the things. So we started talking, and you know, we lived together, the three of us there in Boulder, and friendship developed, and things developed, and we got into the sort of the habit of every night, late at night, we'll sit around the fire or something and talk about all kinds of things. It was, only a year or two later, actually, that when the work started happening, what we call the work, the flow of the insight and knowledge and experience. And we continued with other friend too. But it was a triad, then a few years later became a dyad, which made it more of a dialectic, which means looping. And a lot of discoveries happened, and that you'll find many of them are in this book. The book, actually, before I go to the book, let me finish with Karen. Which is that when we were together at the beginning, she was a young woman, She was young, she's 8 years younger than me. I was young at that time too. I had black hair and all that. But she was shy, and she was, not that articulate. And I mean, when you see her now, you can't imagine she was that girl, that woman, young woman. I mean, and I think it's all because of the work we've done together. The work is done to that individual called Karen, which is now not just an individual, but the reality of the path coming through that individual. And that's what the book tries to do. The book fills a gap in all the literature about this teaching, the Diamond Approach, because all the books are about the teaching itself. I wrote most of them, but some other teachers written some books, but they're all about one segment of the teaching or another. This book is not that way. It is a biography. It's a biography about how things happen. How did those teachings, those insights, that knowledge, those experiences come about? were the processes? What was she doing? What was I doing? What we were both, talking about or practicing together that allowed such openness and such kind of unstoppable flow of our spiritual nature with insights and awakenings. And that at the beginning, of course, I thought it was just we're having some experiences individually. It took a while for us to realize this is really teaching. It's not just for us. It's a teaching for mankind, humankind. But the thing about the book that fills the gap is that it gives the context for all the other books, and it shows how the work actually happens. In fact, for many of the students, for the first time, they will have a modeling by the ones who actually first practiced it. Because we only describe it. It's not easy to model it, but the book will show how you do. What does inquiry mean? How persistent you are. How you deal with difficulties and obstacles. What happens in life situations? What do you do when you shopping or showering and all of that? How the work interacts with life. And our work, down approach, is to be in the world and not of it. And the book shows how that is, and the author, Karen, is a good modeling of that. We have many models of that in the school, true, mature modeling of human beings who are expressions of reality. Karen happens to be the first one, and she tells the inside story. The one thing unique about this book, the way I think about it, I talked to Shampala, I told her, you better publish it. And they said, why? Because there's no book like it in the literature. I said, what do you mean? I said, look around. Is there any biography of a spiritual path, how it came about? Written by somebody engaged in it. There isn't. What you find are biographies written by students or by a few generations later. And by then, you don't know whether it's true, it's a fabrication or some exaggeration or something like that. Or if there are books which are biographies of one's realization, enlightenment, like Bhaktinanda's Guru or Brahman's book, but they are their experiences of a path that has already been there. They're talking about their experience of awakening there. This book is about a path that is happening first time. So it's not somebody awakening in a path. It is a path emerging for the first time in history through the individuals, in it. And that is unique. I haven't seen a book like that. And that's what I wanted, all our publicity, publishers, and all that, to know that point, that this is really significant. There's nothing, nobody has written anything like that. I know many teachers want their Ouspensky. Remember, like Gurdjieff became famous because Ouspensky wrote about the work he learned from Gurdjieff. But Ouspensky didn't know. He didn't see how Gurdjieff was learning what he learned. He just heard stories from Gurdjieff. And we don't know whether the stories he told them were all true or not. But everybody wants Ouspensky, somebody who writes something about their teaching. This is not my Ouspensky. This is somebody actually engaged in the work. No wonder she is considered a co-founder. And she is really, in the book, it's fun. When I read it for the manuscript to give my feedback and correcting facts and stuff like that. Because she used a lot of my experiences and my journals. but that the book is written in a very nice way. She didn't know, nobody knew she can write like that. Turned out that it's a very well written book and lyrically nice and interesting to read. At the same time, challenging because it is not just a story about something that can happen, like a regular story about somebody having some difficulties or adventure. It is a story that can happen to anybody. So it touches us directly. So it's a call to us and a challenge to us. And one thing I noticed when I was reading, when it came out, that I was reading it, sometimes I was getting headaches. I said, why was I getting a headache? Well, she was talking about time when we were getting stuck, when we had things. So she was actually embodying the state she was writing about when she was writing them, and they were transmitted in the books. The headache's just the beginning. As it moves on, it moves on to love and spaciousness and clarity. So there is a lot of transmission in the book about the different parts. Transmission means the energy is there, and the book carries the energy, comes through, and I'm sure you will get it in her talk too. So, I present to you the first of many stars in the school, brilliant stars of the teaching.
Well, that made my job easy. Thanks, Hamid, for giving my talk. Any questions? So I think we're all united by one thing this evening. Well, probably united by many things. But the main purpose is for this creation. And I invite you to judge this book by its cover. It's lovely, and there's quite a story behind that too, which I won't go into, but it was quite colorful and multidimensional in how it emerged. But if you really look at it, it's a real delight to just look at, I think. The woman who came up with this and with all of the team that worked with this, it was a magical journey, and it's multidimensional, multicolored, and multi-universe. If you really look deeply into it, you'll see another world. So I invite you to do that at some point. But this was quite a project. It took many years. It took a lot of weaving of lives and threads and reading Hamid's journals, which is no easy task. It looks like Arabic, even though it's English. And that was quite, I'm one of the few people that can actually read his handwriting. I only had to ask him a few times what a certain word meant, which was actually a surprise to me as well. But, I mean, I know that I can read his handwriting, but I read 35 journals of about 250 pages each of handwritten notes, and synthesized them in a way that brought out and distilled the various parts. And I did not know how I was going to do that. And it wasn't something that I could just come up with and have some kind of an outline and then discern the best features. The journals are alive with all different kinds of mishmash of experiences and events and so on. It really had to distill itself through me. I felt a little bit like I was coming up with a new kind of a system of like a distillery, like taking in all of the material and then letting it drip and see what actually was going to show up as something that was a feature that really needed to be expressed or determined in a certain way, or putting a certain spin on something. And I felt very much that the process of writing this book was very similar to the way the work actually emerged. And one of the things that happened for me each time I sat down is an upwelling of gratitude. And sometimes many tears would flow. And those tears were sometimes having to move through some kind of a barrier, or even just trying to get the lens to switch. It was almost like the tears became a lubricant to get the right lens up so that I could write from that perspective. And it really was like a time machine, whirling and then stopping at a certain place. And I'd have to kind of find the way through that portal and into that time and place. And there's a story about when I was a little girl and reading a newspaper story. I was on the floor and reading this story in the newspaper, and no, actually my mother was reading it. I don't know, it's in the book, you can find out. I have my journal notes. But the point was, I could feel myself on that floor. I knew where I was, and I was seeing the paper at the time. I was much more specific at that time. I'd have to get back into it to do it as precisely as it happened for me when I was writing it. I could feel, I forgot that we had cork floors in our Eichler in Palo Alto, and I felt them, and of course, and we had radiant heating, and I could feel the warmth, and I heard my mother's voice, and it was a very lived experience. It was very alive and very real. So sometimes each time I sat to write, the weeping would begin and the gratitude would arise, and then clarity would come, and I would feel like things would start to fall into place. And then an image or an idea that I had on a walk would find its way in, and it just began to write itself that way. But I didn't start out thinking, wouldn't it be great to really bring the work alive in a way that would invite people in and let them taste it and feel it and have a sensate experience. I didn't think of it that way. I started out by really so many questions always over the years about who was there, how did it start, what did it feel like, what did he say at the first meeting, what happened, what were all the different things that were going on. And I realized this is a chance to chronicle things. And I sat down and started just writing, okay, he did this and then did that, and then I thought, well, there was a feeling there, and there was a sensation with it, and it just started to develop. But the main thing was how much this work is the heart of my life, and how much the heart of the work has always been beating in some way in me and was waiting to be expressed. And I feel that the book really captures the beating pulse of this work. And I feel that same gratitude right now, that it's alive with every bit of me, the best that I could do of being myself in each particular place and event that I wrote about in the most authentic way that I could. And that felt like it gave life to those words, which didn't always come so easily. I always wrote in secret, especially when I fell in love with somebody. I would write little love notes that they would never get because they weren't good enough to give to them, and all of my insecurities and all of those things. And sometimes I'd write a card and send it, and My mother once said to me, "Honey, you write really well." And I said, "I do?" And she said, "Yeah, you write with your heart." And I feel like reading this book, you will read my heart. And the beautiful thing I feel about being able to show the story the way I'm showing it. I mean, often I've gotten advice, well, show, don't tell. That's one of the first lessons, and my editor, sitting right here, thank you for coming. And she said, show it, don't tell it. And occasionally she'd just send something back and say, you're telling me shit, show me. And she got quite stern with me. But I needed that because it's easier to tell. It is very hard to show it, not because of the words don't come. It's because of the incredible vulnerability that I feel each one of you, if you read this book, are going to know me way better than I know most of you. But that's okay, because what I've also seen is through the process of the few people who are friends of mine who have read the book and given me a little feedback of different kinds, one of the common elements is that the book brought alive something in them, and it turned the tides on their own life, their own stories. What were the things that opened, and what were the doors they walked through, and what were the ones they were too scared to walk through, and what are the ones that we slam in our faces and aren't willing to walk through or say, and not even notice that they're there, perhaps. That, to me, is the most satisfying thing about having written this. And it's not like lots of people have read it yet. I don't know how many. But the handful that have showed me what it's meant to them, it's about them. It's about you, really. And that's what the work is about. It's about you. And it's about opening these pages is a way of opening those doors, because it's alive with the work, and I'm just an example. But that example really is a mirror for somebody else, I'm finding, and this wasn't part of why I wrote it either, but it seems to be part of what's happening as people read it. And I'm delighted to know that that's part of its purpose, because that's more important than the people, the events, and all of the things that are written about. It's really that the beating pulse is there, and that's for everybody. And that's what a teaching is. It's for everyone. Teachings happen because they're needed. And they're needed not just by one person. Teachings don't arise because one person needs to have a realization. Teachings arise because the time dictates it. The place makes it an important thing. The situation calls forth a teaching to display itself in a very particular way at a particular time. But that's just finding a fountain so it can spray itself everywhere and make its mist known. And that's the blessings of any teaching, not just this one, but by being engaged in this one from the time it began, I actually can say that it's just been a blessing, but it isn't just something somebody had or did or found. It found us. It found us, it used us, it churned us like butter, smashed us to bits, and let us find out what the real substance was. And that was something then we could share with so many others, and they could butter their own bread with it. I feel excited. I feel lit up in a way that I think is a new thing for me. It's a new situation. I don't feel like being lit up is new. But I think having been used in this way and to share this particular voice with the world is really new for me. It's the first time I ever wrote anything like this or had it written through me. I felt very often just like I was an instrument and that the ink really was some kind of divine blessing, and that it was a flow through this location, and whatever I was becoming at that time, it was able to express it. And if you had known who I was as a little one, you would have voted me least likely to ever write a book. I did not speak much. I giggled a lot. With my siblings, there was a lot of play and joy and that sort of thing. But outside of the home, I didn't have much to say. Well, let's put it this way. I had a lot to say. I did not know how to say it. And storytelling has been around as long as human beings have. In fact, storytelling began before language did, with those cave drawings and stone artwork, and that's all to convey the stories of a culture or a people, or to teach. And there's the self-expression of stories and all of that kind of thing. Actually, the whole anthropology of it is a perfect parallel to me, which was images, ideas, sensations. That's how I thought about things. But there was a gap between thinking and the pictures and the richness of sensations that I felt and getting those out of my mouth or onto a paper. And there was a lot of reasons for that, but that gap was very frustrating and difficult for me for a very long time. And when I met Hamid, something began to open that had started a little bit before that. My stepfather helped me learn to have a conversation. And actually, it started by him letting me hate him. That sounds like, oh my God, that's not very spiritual. It was one of the biggest spiritual openings for me, was to be able to hate him and tell him I hated him. And one thing I love about our work is we deal with those negative things, and they're great openings. But the way he did it taught me something about how to approach somebody when there's something negative, and that's allowed. And he took me by the shoulders one time, and he just looked me straight in the eyes, and he goes, "You can hate me all you want, but you can't treat me like shit in my own house." And I went, whoa. I can what? And I can't what? Exactly. It did not compute. But to be able to be negative with him and have a conversation with him, and we just sat down and talked. He said, "I want you to tell me everything you hate about me." And he listened. And he heard me. And I realized by being able to say that, because he ruined my life, I thought. He took my mother away, and then I had to come begging back to him. This is not right. This is not good. I hate you. I want to be with my mother, but I don't want to be with you. And he said, "That's perfectly understandable to me." He said, "Can I have my turn?" And I said, "Okay." Uh-oh, I didn't know that part was going to happen. And he said, "I really get it. You're really hurt, and it was really hard, and you get to hate me for a while, and that's fine. But like I said, you don't get to treat me like crap we made a deal right then that I got to hate him for as long as I wanted, and there were certain rules about how I expressed that. And that worked out really nicely, to the point where I actually started liking him. And now I'm really sorry he's not here. Yeah, I felt he was really, truly my father, and fathered my soul in a way that took me to freedom. And I love him very much, and that hatred was the portal. So that's another thing about our work, that we embrace everything and all of it. And the other thing about writing this book was I wanted to show that growing is messy, and we all know that. Growing spiritually is super messy because it digs into things and those little places that ego structure neatly houses and keeps under wraps. But the opportunities in the growing process I wanted to show. And I couldn't think of any better way of doing it than showing my own. So I pretty much filleted myself, but in service really of showing how the work works, how things get digested, and how it takes heart. It takes great love. It takes great capacity for discernment. It takes the desire to know, but a desire to know that allows you to release your ideas that keep you comfortable, or the ones that you believe you have to get to, or the ambitions of the things that you want to go toward. There's just a lot of giving up if you really want to know what's true and what's real. You sometimes have to give up things that you truly love and care about. And the cherished ideas of ourselves are usually the first ones we encounter. But I wanted to show the possibilities that are there when the willingness is there, when there's enough love to know about reality, about something that you don't know, and the willingness to really get discriminating about what feels true. But the heart knows what is true. The heart knows, it has a sense of truth and what's real. And we all have that feeling. It's like, no, that's not working for me. But we sometimes try to talk ourselves into it, or try to tell ourselves a story about what's true. And that all starts to feel very cobwebby, and maybe, oh, there's all kinds of brilliant ideas, but the heart's going, excuse me, hello, I'm down, yeah, hello. But that gets muffled over time. So I show the messes, but I also show the joy, the delight in really growing in a way that allows us to know the potential and the incredible journey that life can be. I never cared about enlightenment. I never cared about, oh, I want to be able to find what he's got and be like that in terms of this guru or that guru. I was curious about what they were talking about, and I was very interested, and I did want to grow, but I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. In fact, when somebody asked me when I was a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I had no idea. And I never really could answer that question, but I always had a sense of purpose. When I met Hamid, something fell into line, and purpose began to elaborate on itself. It began to show me the way to go. And I've had an incredible, rich life. And many of you in the audience have been a very big part of that life and a part of this book. In fact, you can just look around and you'll see the pages living in this room. I mean, there's people here who have been friends for years. I think there's people here who I haven't seen in years who were friends at the time I was in Boulder. Friends here now that have ushered me through this book. I've got a husband or two out there. That have shared incredible things. Gregory, who I shared many, many years of growing up together and into our spiritual things. We've had separate ways, and just so many of you have had such a rich part, and I could say something about many, many people in here right now. Sandra, who introduced me to Hamid, and Scotty, who made that phone call and said, "We're not done with you yet. Come to Boulder." There's just a lot of living of the teaching actually in this room that I am appreciating right now. And I think the book really does speak for itself. I'm thinking today a book talk. The book does talk. And it speaks for itself, and it has a voice. And the fact that I could... Oh, actually, that's a little bit of a coming back to something I started, which was that my stepfather taught me how to speak what was really going on with me, even though it was difficult. I met Richard Gordon, who gave me more encouragement. And one of the things that is in my mind often, and had been throughout my life since knowing him. At one point we were in a discussion and I just went mute, which I frequently did because of that pattern of not knowing how to say what was on my mind. But he could see that there was a lot of richness going on in there. And at one point we were having a little disagreement and I just went mute, and he goes, "What's going on?" And I just looked at him. He said, "Don't play dumb. Do not do that." I know you know what you're thinking, and I know you know how to say it right now. And that was another moment of finding a way to convey something to him that wasn't attacking him or wasn't trying to make him wrong, but trying to say just what was going on. So he was another teacher for me. And I'd had many, but I think also Eliana and Janine, both. Janine was a reader of mine. Boy, you poured over the book so many times. Thank you. But you helped to sculpt it and refine it. As I learned to chat, I got a little more elaborate than I really needed to be sometimes. It's like, did I say it yet? Yes, you said it in the first time around. And that's something that came out in the book, too, that needed a little trimming. But Eliana, you helped me find a voice with written word, which I had not had. And that helped me to not just be authentic when I was writing, but actually to infuse those words with meaning and with the joy and the delights and also the pain and the very, very difficult times and the longing and the tremendous aloneness and, again, the bursting forth with the incredible pleasure and celebration of everything and just turning the faucet on as hard as it would come, and finding that the words did come and they happened, and that it could really move through me. So I would write her these little things every once in a while, and I called her my inkwell angel. And I'd have all kinds of nicknames for her, like I do for many, many people in my life. You don't hang around with me very long without a nickname. It just sort of happens, and I've got many too. But I would always sign it pen with fluffy plume or droopy plume or something about feeling like a pen, like I was becoming an instrument, and that my plume was sort of the mood of the day, and it would sometimes be very drippy, and at one point it was pen without plume, or just that became a little way that we had of kind of talking to one another. And so this book is about really the biography of the work. And all good stories, they say, have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in fact, I couldn't find the absolute beginning of the work. It came about in terms of its explicit nature at a certain point when I had left Boulder, and actually when Hamid began the first group after a certain kind of process group that he and Sandra went to Boulder to do. And he began a group that Scott called him and said, "We're not done with you yet. You need to come back here." And the process groups had a bit of a spiritual flavor to them. And Sandra and Hamid brought their spiritual knowledge that they had gained. But it wasn't the work yet. And people were really plunged into a lot of material that was like a clearinghouse for all kinds of historical stuff. But we'd meditate, and I would sit with the groups that were going through things too then. And certainly there was an atmosphere in the room of people deepening and growing, and it was lovely. But when Scott made that phone call and said, "We're not done with you yet," he was very clear that there was more work to do, and that was just the beginning. And so that first phone call was kind of the inspiration for this new level of excavation to begin. But you can see the threads in the book of how Hamid's life, my life, and the life of various people in the book came together as these threads that created a fabric and enabled the work to really come through. But I could also see very much how the way Hamid's life was and the way my life was, that there was purpose that came together and had a very particular spark the very second I met him. That happened only with him at that moment, and has not happened since, where it was a complete openness, 100%. And we were both shy, and I know it's hard to imagine that at this moment. But people think I was born to chat, but I wasn't. But when we did start talking, it did begin a process that really was about what this work has to gift us, which is that you all have something to say, and that the individual consciousness that you are is a book that is written. You have a history, and you have your unique way of experiencing the world and yourself, and that is valuable and valid and beautiful, and it can be unwrapped and become even more unique, more fabulous and polished and beautiful. And I don't mean polished as in make it polished. I'm talking about an inner illuminating light that makes your uniqueness authentic and real and true as a person. And what I love about this work is that who we are as individuals, as well as what we are as the vastness the depth, the incredible luminosity of being itself, being existence, non-existence, and beyond, into all the realms that we talk about, that is lived personally in this world. And that makes you a gift to this world. The more we know who and what we are personally, it blurs the line between being a person and being true nature, God, light, whatever you want to call it. There's no division in those. It is one and the same. And when we know what we are, it enables us to express that in a very personal way. And that's the beauty. You're not supposed to be like anybody else. That's why it's so difficult. When you're trying to be like somebody else, how it never works. It's not supposed to. You are what you're supposed to be. You just don't know all of it yet, or maybe many of you do. I'm not sure what the audience is I'm talking to, but all I know is there's always more for me to know. There's always something new and different, whether it's some internal, impersonal awakening, or a way that can be expressed newly. So I could go on, but I'd rather hear from you, and we can take time now to have questions, and maybe that'll spark something else. But I'd like to hear from you, what you'd like to know. I don't know if you've read the book or not, or what, but do you have a question? No question. Something you want to say? Do you have a question? Yes. Eliana, right here, has a question.
As Karen's editor, I wanted to see if I could convey something about how she was being throughout the entire process. She had been writing for many years before we began our work together. But over the course of it was about 3 years, I think, that we were involved. When she talked about that distillation process just now, I had this image of her that really captures for me the way that she was able to jump into that process. And I see her with her skirts hiked up in this big vat of grapes, and stomping, it's like just really getting the juice out of everything and finding that way in her own soul to distill that which she had experienced on her own with Hamid and her marriages and her friendships and everything that she went through. And the degree of vulnerability that she opened herself to me with, and we didn't really know each other. I think we'd had some kind of consultation about a chapter in another book. But here I was, basically a stranger, and I saw that she wasn't coming at this from a place of, okay, this is what happened in the past, and I'm a distant person from that, and I'm just going to tell the story. She really did go into that time machine in the most magnificent way. And because of Zoom technology, I'm able to watch her as she's doing that. So I can see that unhiddenness that she would bring to every story. And whenever there was something like more, maybe an energetic gap, and I could say to her, Karen, I think there's something else here. What is it? Why am I feeling that something is missing? And every time she would just dive down, no matter what it took, and find that missing thing and speak to that with so much honesty and sometimes tears. I mean, she just didn't. When she says, I brought my whole self to that, I just really want to be a witness and say that she did that with the greatest of grace, and that truly every part of it was an honor for me. And we had a lot of fun. We laughed a lot. We did. And there were times I cried too. So I'm just delighted that you're all going to get to have a bit of that experience. So thank you.
Thank you. You're very kind. Yes, Janine.
I'm wondering if there's anything you could read us.
Anything I could read?
Like a paragraph or two, or a page or two, or just to show us.
And not tell?
Right, exactly.
This is in a chapter called Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. The chapter headings were one of the most fun things. They just sort of came to me. There was no trouble thinking about them, and it was fun. That's one thing I really like about this work, too. It's really fun. It's like the lightheartedness and the exhilaration of being. It doesn't have to be all like serious, and you can feel serious. It is serious, but because it's significant and important, but that's what makes it so much fun. So that's one of the many things I love about this work. Okay, I don't know where this will go, but let's see. The first thing that came into focus through my sleep-drenched eyes was the white plaster ceiling above me. Perry had been on duty at the hospital for a couple of days, and I'd spent most of that time alone, enjoying painting and contemplating. As I lingered in our bedroom, in my bed, I traced imaginary pictures in the tiny cracks on the plaster. One of them pointed in the direction of the long sash window and led my gaze to the snow outside. As I watched it swirl, I became aware of the lump in my stomach that had been plaguing me for the past few days. The sight of new snow drew me out of bed and to the window overlooking the backyard, where I saw Mushka. She was my doggie. She was a Samoyed dog who I loved so much. Where I saw Mushka just disappearing into her snowy den, only her black and pink nose giving her away. My heart pulsed with love for her. I padded my way to the kitchen to concoct an herbal brew to melt this lump once and for all. No nausea, but I did have a thick feeling in my head that I recognized as a sign of some unconscious material arising. I thought it likely that new territory had been unearthed due to some recent essential experiences, but I hadn't connected this with the discomfort in my midsection, which I was certain was physical. I sat contemplating, drinking cup after cup of hot tea to try to melt this odd feeling. Sometimes it felt like a tension, and sometimes it like a density. Just as I was verging on hopelessness, Hamid called. We had planned to be in contact about arrangements for his next trip, so hearing from him wasn't unexpected. The strange sensation grew even more intense as we spoke. I told him how it had come and gone over the past few days, and I have done everything to try to make it go away, and it just stays there. I concluded in defeat. What if you just feel it without trying to make it go away? He offered with his usual interested neutrality. Oh, of course. My whining transformed to join his curiosity. So what does it feel like? It feels hard in there, like I swallowed a rock. I drew in a breath and let it out slowly while attending to the sensation, suspending my ideas about it for the time being. Hamid had reminded me of the main premise we had been working with lately, to simply be with anything that comes up, to be interested in what is there, to gather as much information as possible by letting things bubble up and feeling them, and to let go of any tendency to direct what might come next. I don't have anything emotional going on about it, Hamid. I was puzzled by this. Then I realized I was looking for a feeling of some sort, or even a recognizable quality, and this was creating a subtle resistance. I settled more into not knowing, which led me into now knowing. How does it affect you? Hamid's tone remained neutral and open. I don't really feel the effect of it yet. I paused, noting that this was true, but not completely. I was feeling something. I wasn't numb, but I couldn't quite land on the right words to describe it. It wasn't just presence, at least not in the way I had felt it before. It was distinct but unfamiliar. I slowed down and sat there for some time, breathing and attending to this lumpy phenomenon. Then the clouds in my consciousness dissolved as though a brisk wind had been summoned to cleanse my mind. I became enthralled with a new sense that was beginning to pierce my consciousness. It wasn't merely the absence of emotion, it was the presence of clarity. Quite the opposite of the thickness I had woken up with. Only the week before, I had felt the presence like water, but it was viscous. Was it related? It felt similar in its lucidity, but different in texture. I'm very clear, I said aloud. I sounded emphatic to myself. The pristine sense of presence continued. As Hamid continued to ask me about it, it became brighter. I felt as though I were seeing the world through eyes that had been washed with Rain-X. You know that windshield washer stuff you put on and it makes everything kind of really bright and shiny. I was completely involved yet detached at the same time. Wow, I feel as light and fresh as the air on top of the Rocky Mountains. The rock became glossy. Then a sharp sensation began to arise. It was not painful. As I paid close attention, things began to shift. I can actually feel the edges. They're like facets, Hamid. And how's the lumpy feeling? Not there anymore, I said in astonishment. And then, oh my God, it's a diamond! That was my first diamond experience. Yes, a question.
Hi, I've read about a quarter of your book so far.
Hi, Clint.
Hi, it's great to see you, Karen.
It's great to see you.
Likewise. I know you had Hamid's journals to take you back and get the details of your work with him, but you also describe in great details part of your life back then that Hamid wasn't involved in. And since I have trouble remembering where I parked my car the night before, I mean, you were talking about the food that was served or specific people and the furniture and so on. And I'm just amazed how you could remember all those details. Did you keep a journal of yourself?
I kept a journal also, but I did not describe the detail of my furniture in it.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious because it was amazingly clear.
Well, that's what Janine asked me too. How did you remember all that? It really was a time machine. Literally, I went back. The time came to me. It felt like it was here, right now. When I felt as that little girl on that floor that was warm, I was that little girl. When I spoke with Eliana on the Zoom sometimes and we were talking about that, she could see that I actually was that little girl. When I wrote about hiding behind my hair, when I would be with Hamid and feel shy, literally my eyes would kind of draw back the way they once were. If you saw pictures of me, they were very drawn back and a little bit slit-like, and shy and hunched and rounded, and I'm sort of doing that right now. And I don't really know if I have anything else to say. But it's really, I mean, I tend to be somewhat of a shapeshifter anyway. Any state or quality, including ego states, they show on me. I'm very transparent to them. But it turned out that also time is very transparent for me. And that I could just enter that time and I could literally look around the room and just see everything in detail. But that's also something that I realize that I did. I'm just realizing it right now. My parents got engaged with self-hypnosis when I was in high school. And that's one of the things that turned me on to my inner world. And they would take me back on these trips, they called them, and they loved doing it because of all the specificity that I could have. So my mother took me back to when I was about 2 years old, and I was just walking through the house describing the whole thing, telling everything, and then at 3 I was at my grandmother's, and I went and I talked all about it, and then I talked about how, where's Daddy? And I said, Daddy went to get the car. And then she asked me a few more questions, and I had a lisp. We'd all forgotten that I had a lisp. So somehow, I guess that's just sort of been something that was easy for me to do, and the book brought it out in spades because it was a necessity, in a way. And it was a necessity to bring you in there with me. And show you the textures and give you the taste and the flavors and the feeling so the necessity drew out the capacity, actually.
Well, you really did evoke those sensations for me.
What?
You really did evoke those sensations for me. It was very clear, crisp pictures about what was going on at that time in your life. I have another question. You also mentioned your interest in your own art. I wonder, do you still do art?
Yeah.
Will we ever be able to see some of it?
What?
Will we ever be able to see some of it?
Probably not. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I can never say never. The images were always a familiar and easy way for me to express myself. And my mother, being an artist, taught me a lot about it, and it was one of the ways I excelled. So it was a language for me, and she spoke to me through those images. When I would be having a hard time, we would paint, and she'd have me talk about it.
Wow.
When it was a rainy day, she took everything out of the living room, and we just cleared it. She'd put down paper everywhere and put down paint, and, okay, kids, have at it. And we'd dip our fingers in there and paint stuff, and then she'd have us talking about why we were painting what we painted, and had us talk about ourselves that way. That was one way she got me talking a bit about my inner world. She knew I had a rich inner world and got me talking that way. So art was always familiar. As I got more involved in the work and I really found myself engrossed in it, and it took much time of conversation. I gave up many things. That was one of the things I felt I had to give up to immerse in what I felt was the inner art of exploration, and having the science of it and the art of it blend into a way that could open up to beauty and an aesthetic quality that was beyond my wildest dreams. So I became the paintbrush, and instead of using one, but I still dabble. I never felt I was excellent at it, just like I play the piano, and you'll probably never hear me do that either. But I do it for my own benefit, just that it's a release for me, and I think I answered your question.
I have a comment now. Like I said, I read just about a quarter of the book so far, and I'm really very moved by it. And this is really, I think, an important contribution to the Diamond Heart literature, because it fleshes in the history of both you and Hamid in a way that I haven't seen before, and it makes both of you more three-dimensional, more human. And I just want to thank you for, I'm looking forward to the other 3/4 of the book that I haven't read yet.
Well, I hope it continues.
I'm sure it will.
And, well, they say, like most stories are supposed to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And I did say I couldn't quite find the absolute beginning as I watched the threads, but the book ends and the story continues, and I really hope that you fill in that story, that whatever's inspired in you lets itself be known. And that actually is my wish for you, Clint.
Thank you, Karen. It's been realized a lot more than I ever thought it would, and I know there's a lot more realization coming in the future.
Good.
So I'm just very grateful, and thank you.
Yes.
I think the idea of modeling, I've been in the school for a long time and sit and listen to you teach, and it feels like there's a whole different being there, or a different aspect, just you being yourself, and it's not, you're not teaching, or you're telling, what am I saying? But in listening to you and Hamid's introduction, there's a deep sense of satisfaction and just listening. And as you talked, I'm seeing there's this luminosity that's just here, that's that I greatly appreciate. And more lately, the deep bow that you mentioned, first the Kalofan, whatever it's called, I've feel that's a deep opening for me, this gratitude. Mm-hmm. And I'm deeply appreciative of you and of the whole school.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. Well, I also did want to bring in the human element of it to show how the work was worked at the very beginning and what really happened and how the school evolved, how the structures evolved. You know, all of it is of a piece. And teachings are meant for people. They're not meant for goddesses and gods. You know, it's like we're human and we're not perfect. And I think that there's a way in which some people think that we're trying to head for perfection, or there's some kind of a stance you need to take. And if you don't show, I don't know, that you have to act a certain way to be realized. And for me, the mark of realization isn't just the state that you can feel, but it's how you move through life as that, and not that you don't have troubles or difficulties, because as we continue to grow, we continue to find ourselves in situations we've never been in, and it'll draw out parts of us that need to be developed, that didn't need to be developed before, and we stumble and we fall and we say stuff to people that we wish we hadn't, and we can't unsay it, and but we can deal with it with integrity. We can do it with that goodness and that underlying nature as something that we know, and expressing that as well as we can. And that's an important recognition, I think. And people are not perfect, no matter how realized. Meaning, and I don't even know what perfect means anymore, but we can display the perfections of our nature and the qualities that are the blessings of that nature. And the more we give over to that, the more they can be displayed and the more good we can bring into this world. And Lord knows we need it. And I think that's really my wish too, is that the image I had when the book was released on January 9th. I just felt like I threw it into the universe, and it tore itself apart into a million pieces and flew everywhere. And it's no longer mine or me. It's to do its work. It's to do its teaching and its work out there. And if it inspires and sparks and gets people to look in and see that there's richness there, and that there's beauty and goodness and a possibility for you to know that because it's a human story, then the book is doing its work. And it's me to step back and let it fly and land wherever it does. Yes, some more questions, Hamid. What wisdom can I impart?
I was thinking, since we're in California, it might be useful to say something about how the work in California started differently from Colorado.
I was going to do that, actually.
I thought that might be interesting things. Everybody here in California,
Right.
they might think it's different.
Right.
Happened the same as in Colorado.
Thank
Although
you.
the work started in Colorado, but then started in California, but it was different.
Yeah, well, for beginners, I mean, for the start, coming here tonight is kind of full circle because I was at California College of Arts and Crafts, as it was called then, just down the road in 1969, 70. And then I moved to Colorado on my way there with Hamid and Sandra. And the work began there with groups when Hamid began his after-process group starting, and that's when presence began to arise as the teacher, and we have a whole teaching of presence and true nature and all of that, which you can read all about in the book or Hamid's books. It's way too much for me to explain right now, but the significance is Hamid was also living here. He was traveling back to Colorado. He had moved back here, and he was traveling there to do his groups. But here, he was doing Reichian work. He was doing Reichian breath work. He was getting a degree in it. And he had clients in Reichian breath work. And as he was exploring presence, he was also utilizing breathwork techniques and body techniques, and just seeing how if he moved into a certain issue with somebody, certain other kinds of things could be explored. And very often in therapy or breath work or body work, people get into states and so on, but usually that's when, okay, I feel good, we're done. But that's where Hamid went, you feel good, what's that? And began to just invite exploration. So after a few years of doing the Reichian work here, a group evolved and began to meet at his first house up on Cragmont. There was a place they met, and then moved to Richmond, where he met with people in the living room of his house. 15 people were there. And these were all students of Marie's. Hi, Marie, wherever you are. She's not able to be here tonight. She's been a great support as well for me throughout this process. But she also was trained in Reichian therapy, and so there were students she had and Hamid had, and she was one of the first teachers as well. But she was doing Reichian breath work with people he had in the group. So it started from the Reichian breath work that he was doing, which he began to modify too, and not use exactly the same ways. And it's been modified further. But we see the body as a very important vessel in this work. But that's a whole nother story. But the embodiment of being and really letting it come through the flesh as part of our personal vessel in this 3D space is important. So the way that it came about here was somewhat different. In the Colorado group, the breathwork was happening alongside the work that Hamid was doing in groups. And that was sort of an adjunct rather than the central thing. Here, the one-on-one breathwork was the central thing, and the group evolved out of that. So it's a little bit of a kind of mirror image, in a sense, of how it developed. We have this incredible temple. It just is a beautiful space where we do our work, and it's like a hive, and has become the real heart of the teaching here. And this is really where many groups are. There's many groups all over the world as well, and we do teaching in other places than just here. But this is where Hamid and I have an office. This is where the staff is. This is where many of the structures have their backing that keeps the work integrous with the cultures that we're in. We do a lot of researching how to go into, how to be in other cultures and their legal needs and legal structures. So this is where a lot of things happen, where groups are, where Hamid and I teach, and also in the office downstairs where a lot of the work is still moving and elaborating itself and still growing, which actually I didn't say, which is an emphasis I'd like to make, which is the book really carries you through the first 15 years of the work, pretty much. And the years since then, since 1990, many, many new realizations have occurred, and only a very small fraction of those have been unpacked and taught. So there's probably much more material about the years since 1990 than actually what happened before then. And so you can just only imagine the richness that was there at the beginning, and that incredible force of the teaching making itself known is continuing. That Big Bang started, but it has not stopped its trajectory. It's still going strong and lighting up all kinds of realizations that have yet to be articulated. Hamid has, in his last couple of books, given some sense of what those teachings are. So there's a question back there, and then here.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
I'm more than halfway through the book, and I wanted to just reflect back to you that I'm totally inspired. Also, there's a way I've idealized the school and idealized teachers in the past, and I'm finding that that's been something that's kind of crumbled the last week or so in a really good way.
It's always good.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I'm afraid of heights.
Yeah. So I'm feeling so much gratitude and love for what you've put into the book. It feels like your personal heart that I get to be with. And I've had a number of spiritual teachers over the years, but it's always felt like maybe because I've idealized people, I haven't been able to be with the personal heart in a way. And so it's just a tremendous blessing for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, idealization is an important thing to get through, and it really helps us to live more honestly in our own aloneness. But also, we might find that what we see in front of us after the idealization breaks down is far more intriguing, interesting, and luminous than it was before. You just don't have to make a thing about it. And it doesn't have to mean it's a support for you. But you go, girl. Yes, up here.
Hi. Wow. Almost ate the mic. Yeah. I'm just so curious, Karen, what it was like at the sort of jumping off point when you and Hamid realized that something was coming through that was really, really, I maybe didn't know how big it was, but that there was something real that was trying to emerge. It's an interesting juncture because I think other people too, sometimes think something real is coming through and then it turns out to be, I don't know, maybe it was real and it just went wrong, or I don't know, I'm just kind of curious what it was like for you.
When we realized it was a path, or when it was real?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I actually haven't read the book yet. I've read a little bit what was the part that you could read before it came out. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is, was there a point at which you felt the bigness of the hugeness, the intensity of what the Big Bang, as you said? Like, could you feel that? And was there anything previous to that that was an indication to you when you look back that that was going to come through your soul?
I never thought about it that way. The moment I actually recognized presence from its perspective, that was it for me. It was real, that was it. And that was the Big Bang for me. It was not just having the experience, it was, oh my God, this is another universe. And that was, I'll let you read the book to find out when that was. But the reality of it that was coming through was clear then. I had never heard it described exactly this way, but I wasn't exactly thinking of it. I mean, we had many experiences, Hamid and I, that had never been described in any other way, but we assumed somebody knew about them in some way or another, and some people did. But seeing it as a path in its own right took time. So it wasn't like a moment of, this is a path, dude, we got to go out and teach this stuff. No, it was many people. I do that to him sometimes. I go, dude, no, we can't do that. That's how I catch his attention. But 15 people in the living room getting these kinds of experiences, being able to feel themselves in an authentic way, that felt good and right. And more people are hearing. Great, come on in. It felt like, yes, once you know that, it is meant to share. Mm-hmm. It is for the purpose of that. But in terms of, oh wow, we really got, this is a path, and we are like so on it, and we're gonna go out and do it, and hey, get that book written. It was never like that. It was sort of like, haven't you noticed there's a pattern to how the students are opening up? And it's very similar to what happened to us, although we're not teaching them that yet. It was a group effort. Those first students in the room were the second tier of guinea pigs. And when we realized the practice of being present, and it was a very intense and structured time in Colorado when these first guinea pigs came in. It was a lot of work. They mostly did tasks. And every once in a while, Hamid would stop and they'd do a little processing and a little this and that, when no one would dare say, I hate doing this fucking task for somebody else's fucking living room.
I'm so glad I came into the school later.
Yeah. But what started happening is people started getting it. It started coming. And Hamid started being able to discern, they're angry. If we take them in, just what does that feel like? Where is it going? What are you angry about? And so the second tier of guinea pigs started to have the same resolution in the same way with the same issues. And we're going, this is more than just a pattern of 2, 3, 5, whatever the small number of people were at the time. And then his students, his clients here started to go into various things. And so it was more of a beginning to ripple out and seeing how something's happening. And then these diamonds started showing up, which really are the carrier of the teaching, and opened us up it up to its knowledge. And knowledge began to be synthesized and systematized in a way that we could look at and go, this is teaching us something. And we never owned it like, oh, it's our teaching. No, Hamid never says, I am the source. No one human being can be the source. Of course, the source of who he is, who we are, is the source, but it's not the person people see. It's something much more mysterious, much more invisible than that. And we weren't hell-bent on coming up with this great idea. It was really elaborating itself through us. And we were doing the same thing with the teaching as we were doing with ourselves, seeing what the patterns were, connecting the dots, looking at what was happening, seeing how things would dip into then yet another level. Another quality would show up, another dimension would happen. And so it was a scientific investigation, and the knowledge just began to appear, and at some point it became obvious this is a teaching on its own, with things that have tastes and feels of other teachings, but this is not a synthesis. This is something quite different. And then we began to realize that, and it was humbling more than anything. It made us bow deeper, surrender further, and feel more responsible, and give up more for it.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yes, I'm Howard Cornelius. I knew you
Howard.
briefly in Palo Alto.
When I was 18 or 19, was it?
No, you
22.
You were 20 and
22.
21, and you just got accepted to Berkeley.
Somewhere in there. No, that was afterwards, I think. Anyway,
Well,
Howard,
anyway.
hello.
Hello.
How you've changed.
Well, hopefully for the better.
Yeah. So.
But I just wanted to say, I just had a comment earlier that I'm not surprised what you've become. I saw your openness and your open heart way back when you were in your 20s. I mean, it's not a surprise. You could have gone a number of different ways, but you kind of picked the best path, I guess.
It picked me.
Okay.
That's really what happened.
But you were always out there trying to help people.
That's true.
Yeah, you were. And I'm only sorry that you were always charging out the door, and I never got a chance to really talk to you. Thank you.
I was spunky. So I think that we're going to close for now, and I'm going to be downstairs signing books if you have one you want signed. If not, I'll just be hanging out, not doing anything. So I appreciate your coming tonight and becoming part of the beating pulse of this work. It's everything to me, and it is everything itself. So take care and see you around.
Thank you.